for being here, and we'll get going only a few minutes behind schedule. I want to first just thank Portland Community College for hosting us and providing us with this space. They do this for the city a lot, and we appreciate it. So, PCC, thank you. So tonight, here's what we're about. We want to hear your thoughts about improvements and some proposals for changes in the police accountability system. The goals are to maintain and strengthen community input and oversight, and to provide a procedurally just, efficient, and clear process for people who file complaints and for police bureau members. Here's what's going to happen. This evening, the city attorney is going to provide information on some proposals that are now before us as a community and how they were developed. We'll hear from the co-chair from the Citizens Review Committee, who will share perspectives of the CRC. There will be space, obviously, for public comment and questions. It's important to know that what's in front of us all this evening is proposals, not completed work. There are code changes that have yet to be drafted. We have scheduled a city council session for September 7th to consider changes in this area. So that's when we will get to this in terms of a formal proposal being considered by the city council. But tonight is a chance to preview the ideas that have been developed and to hear from people that have worked on this. So we want to know what your thoughts are about the overall process changes and specific points. Brad Taylor from our Office of Neighborhood Involvement has volunteered to act as our facilitator, and we appreciate that. So we'll turn it over to Brad. And then, as I said, the city attorney's going to, after Brad gets us started, the city attorney's going to walk us through the proposal that is now before us. So, Brad, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate everyone being here tonight to discuss this important topic. So thank you all for being here, and thank you all for making yourself available. As was said, we're going to have a bulk of the evening set aside for public comment. So if you wish to comment and you haven't signed up yet, there is a sign-up sheet in the back. So please make sure that you put a name there, and so that we can call you. And just to let you know, some people submitted written comments, and I'll be reading those. So it's not that I have many comments to make. I'm just reading on behalf of folks, and I'll make sure to give them credit when I read for them. So before we get started and I pass it over to the city attorney, I wanted to formally welcome everybody. I'm borrowing from a welcome that was shared with me at an event from Resolutions Northwest. So I would like to welcome you all in the same manner. I would like to welcome men, women, transgender people, and two-spirits, your bodies, your minds, your creativity, and your passion. People living in Portland, other parts of Oregon, Washington, and elsewhere. Those who sleep indoors and those who sleep outside. I'd like to welcome your dreams and your hopes for our world. And I would like to honor the many different languages that we speak in this room: Spanish, English, Sign, Mandarin, German, French, and others. I welcome survivors, people of Hispanic descent, African descent, Asian descent, European descent, people native to this land, and people of mixed and multiple descents. We welcome people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, heterosexual, queer, and those who none of these labels describe. People who identify as activists, policymakers, politicians, and all members of the public. We welcome those of all ages, from infant to elder. And we welcome your emotions: joy, bliss, grief, rage, indignation, contentment, disappointment, and love. We honor those who support you to be here tonight, who make your presence possible, your families, genetic or otherwise. And we welcome mystics, seekers, believers of all kinds, our elders, those here in the room, and those in our lives, and those who have passed along, and those who have passed with others dear to us who have died. Finally, I would like to welcome the ancestors who lived in this land, where we are now, and I ask to honor them. And as we move forward tonight, I ask that we honor each other in the space that we've created here, that we create an opportunity to speak and to listen, a place to be heard. And with that, we'll pass the agenda over to the first part, which will be our presentation from Mark Amberg, the Chief Deputy with the City Attorney's Office.
Actually, it'll be Ellen Osnak to start, and then I'll follow up after Ellen.
I stand corrected.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
So I know we're being taped, so I'll try to speak up, but since we're in a small enough room, I'm just going to use my voice. So I'm a senior deputy city attorney. I work in the city attorney's office. ago. And as part of that, my job is to give advice to various people in the city and to also inform the public about what some of the requirements are, why the city agreed to do some of the reforms that we've already implemented. And for tonight's discussion, my purpose in being here today is to give you, the public here in the audience and at home, information about some of those changes that the city is considering so that you all can give the elected officials, the Department of Justice, other stakeholders in the officer accountability system, your thoughts about our preliminary work with an eye towards, as Mayor Hales said, a city council hearing at which all of the changes will actually be in code form, and you will have yet another opportunity as members of the public to help refine and inform the changes that we want to make. So, oh, wow, okay, great. I don't know who's operating that for me, but thank you, whoever's moving through the PowerPoint. Just to give you a little bit of the backdrop to the timetable and why it is that we're having this very public discussion now, is that we entered into a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice in which we agreed that our officer accountability system, which there are various terms you can use: officer accountability, discipline system, but the way in which the city receives feedback from the public about the performance of its officers, both positive and negative, that's the officer accountability system. And we agreed about 2.5 years ago that we thought that Portland could do a better job. And specifically, what Portland was interested in is getting our officer accountability system to be fairer and expeditious both for officers and for complainants. And that concept falls under the large umbrella of procedural justice. And so the problem that both Portland and the Department of Justice identified that we were trying to solve together is that the Department of Justice felt that our current system, while it provided unique and creative opportunities for multiple inputs from multiple parties, that creativity created a system that was also complex, particularly for complainants to understand. And so part of what we're trying to achieve is to make our process one in which, if you are somebody that has interacted with a police officer and you want to be able to tell the person's employer, this officer did a great job, we want you, the person, to be able to know immediately, here's how I can say this officer did a great job. I'm going to be sure that this gets back to this person's boss. We have a solution for you. Similarly, if you have an interaction with an officer and you think, you know what, that wasn't a very good interaction. I'm not trying to get the officer fired, but I'd really like to let the person's boss know that I didn't think that was a very good interaction. We have a process that we're going to tell you about tonight that we've come up for that, to address that situation, so that it is very clear you're going to talk to the person's boss is going to get back to you, and that's all going to happen within 60 days. And then we have a process for when you have an interaction with an officer and you think that interaction was very wrong, and that there is a systemic response that is needed, and that it's a serious matter. I mean, all feedback is serious, but where it is a very serious matter, we have a robust institutional response, and it goes something like this. If you have a very bad interaction with an officer and you want to let the officer's employer know, we have an independent police review that is going to take your complaint. You can also file it at a precinct. There's multiple ways that you can file a complaint. And then what we want to have happen is we want that complaint to be investigated just as we would for a very serious homicide. We're going to apply a very rigorous investigation process to that, and then we're going to give that investigation to the officer's boss. And we want the officer's boss to look at that and say, I think the officer did good in this aspect, not in this fact. We want the officer's boss to render an opinion about the officer's performance. And then we're going to give that opinion back to the complainant. We're also going to give that opinion to the Independent Police Review Board and to the internal investigation process people, and we're going to show that to them and say, do you think the officer's boss got it right? If any one of those three people think that the officer's boss didn't get it right, and this includes the complainant, if the complainant thinks, I don't think the boss got it right, then the complainant gets to send it to a review board. So does IPR, the Independent Police Review Board. If they think the officer's boss got it right, they're going to send it to this consolidated review board. That review board is going to have more citizens on it than it does officers, and that group is going to look at the investigation, the recommendations, and they're going to also make an opinion about whether or not they think the officer's boss got it right. All of that information is going to go to the chief of police, and the chief is going to make a final discipline decision. So that, in a nutshell, really is the system that we're proposing. That is not the system we have today, and so the purpose of our changes is to make this just as simple as what I just told you, instead of what we have now, which is a lot of difficulty in explaining to complainants how it is when you file a complaint. We're going to get your complaint resolved within certainly 180 days, but we hope even less than that. So for those that are deeper into the weeds, in May of 2015, the Department of Justice asked us, the city, to take a holistic look at our discipline system and propose the kind of changes that would simplify it. And not only simplify it, but get the investigations done, certainly within 180 days, but in the timeliest way possible. And these are some of the paragraphs that they cited where they did not think that the city was fully in compliance with the agreement. So next slide, if anybody's, I can do it myself. So our goals for today are just to describe this new process, get your feedback. I had some feedback that people were very concerned that this process appeared to be rushed and perhaps not all that well thought out, and that it would be helpful for folks to know what work did go into this. So there was an internal work group that started in May of 2015. That internal work group looked at the possibilities for streamlining, the budget implications, and what was possible. And then we took that, those very preliminary information, and we gave it to a small focus group. And they worked for 6 months. We're having the town hall tonight. We're going to collect public comment over the next month, and then on September 7th, we're going to have the council hearing. So the work group, as I said, the internal work group that met for 6 months, they mapped the system, they proposed simplification and streamlining, identified needed resources. Council actually already applied some of the resources so that IPR can do more robust independent investigations so that they can dismiss less cases. Some of that has already been implemented. The small focus group that met for 6 months, those were key individuals who were either currently participating. There was a representative from CRC, a representative from the Police Review Board, Dr. Bethel from the Albina Ministerial Alliance, as well as key people internally. They met for 6 months to look at the timelines, how things could be different, and some of the proposals that you see here tonight were vetted by this group. And the specific areas of agreement that the focus group identified were that all citizen complaints should be investigated. That is not the case now. Under the proposed changes, all citizen complaints would be investigated. Everyone agreed that the nature of the allegation should determine the process that you used. So as I described earlier, if it's something where you just want to give kind of feedback to the boss, that's a different process than if there is a serious interaction that you think needs a formal institutional response. Everyone agreed that complaint and commendation forms should be readily available to the public, that our mediation program should be formalized in policy and better advertised to the community. That the Police Review Board process delivers a high-quality product, but it needs more civilian voices, and that the CRC process must be changed. And then Mark will get into the details of the changes. I do, on the last point, the CRC process, I think many people have expressed concerns about that part of the change in particular, and so we expect and welcome questions on that. I know there's a representative or two from CRC, and they can give you their perspective about what is helpful or not helpful about the changes. And so I wanted to let you all know that that particular piece we particularly welcome feedback on. And you'll hear more, but in terms of the amount of time that each part of the process takes, those are some of the questions we anticipate and are happy to answer for you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Great, thanks, Ellen. And really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Very briefly, I work with Ellen in the City Attorney's Office, and the main focus of my practice for the city is labor and employment law, and I work primarily with the Police Bureau, so I'm involved really on a day-to-day basis in working with the police discipline accountability system, and that's where I come into the picture here. So this chart up on the screen right now is a very broad overview of the police accountability process that we've been taking a look at, the primary stages of the process, and this is the proposed system that is being put out for review at this point. The first part of the process, and I'll go into just a little bit of detail on the different stages of the process as a follow-up to what Ellen presented. Of course, the first step in the process is the intake. Somehow the complaint or the issue that's involved has to come into the city, has to come into the police system. Currently, the intakes that come in, there's a more robust intake process. It takes longer in the intake process. One thing that we looked at in the groups that were looking at these issues was shortening up that intake process to do basically a triage of the complaint and make a decision very early on, very quickly, whether it should go for this lower level supervisory investigation, which are generally would be lower level type complaints. An officer was rude to me, the officer didn't take a report when I feel the officer should have taken the report. That would go on this supervisory track on the right-hand side. That would be resolved by the officer's supervisor after discussions with the officer, of course, and the complainant. The other track would be the more formal investigation track, either by internal affairs or by internal police review. We've noted some, these are proposed timelines for each phase of this process. Again, as Ellen mentioned, under the Department of Justice Settlement Agreement, we are mandated to, the city is mandated to attempt to complete its investigations within a maximum of 180 days. So we've broken it down, trying to come up with realistic timeframes for each part of this process to give an idea of how a complaint moves through the process. So once a complaint is assigned for investigation, as Ellen mentioned, one of the key components that was looked at in this review process was all complaints will be investigated. There would only be an outright dismissal of a complaint for very limited reasons. Currently, there's a significant number of cases that or complaints that get dismissed at the very beginning of the process. There would be a much more limited basis for dismissal, only and for very basic reasons. For example, no jurisdiction. It was not a Portland police officer that was involved in the incident. There was no basis in fact. The event didn't occur. The complainant's unavailable, or even if the complaint was true, there would be no possible violation of a police bureau policy. So under the current system, the proposed system, once the complaint is investigated, then it goes to the officer's commander or RU manager, that's responsibility unit manager, for a recommendation on findings, whether the officer's actions were in policy or out of policy, basically, that it's sustained or not sustained, the allegation of misconduct. And at that point, for certain cases, under the current system and under the proposed system as well, they can go to what is currently referred to as the Police Review Board. Cases involving proposed discipline where it will be any time off without pay, demotion, discharge, those all go to the review board, obviously the more serious cases. Also, if the individuals involved in the review process right now, if they controvert or contest the recommended findings of the officer's RU manager, it can be sent to a review board. Right under the current process, the review board, if a case goes to the review board, right now it's made up of, for officer discipline matters, it's made up of 5 voting members, and there are 7 advisory members on the board. The 5 voting members are currently 1 community member, 1 officer peer member, the independent police review director or his or her designee, the officer's supervising commander or RU manager, and the officer's assistant chief. Those are the 5 voting members on the police review board currently for discipline cases. For officer-involved shootings or in-custody death cases, there's an additional community member from the Citizen Review Committee that sits on the board, and 1 additional peer officer for a total of 7 voting members in cases of an officer-involved shooting or an in-custody death. The Police Review Board, they make recommendations to the Chief of Police regarding whether there was a violation of policy, and if so, a recommended level of discipline. And under the current system, if a case involves a complaint by a community member, the community member can appeal the Police Review Board's recommended finding to the Citizen Review Committee, potentially City Council if the Citizen Review Committee and the police chief can't agree on a resolution of the case. And once the case is appealed to the Citizen Review Committee, the police chief and the commissioner in charge, currently the mayor, must wait until the CRC process is fully completed before they can go forward with any proposed discipline, any recommended discipline of the officer, and this process takes a substantial amount of time at this point. Okay, thank you. Just a couple more minutes. So under the, excuse me, the proposed system, the proposal would be to instead of having the Citizen Review Board hear individual appeals of individual officer discipline cases, there would be an enhanced participation by the Citizen Review Committee as well as an additional community member at what's currently called the Police Review Board itself. And on this chart, it's referred to as the Consolidated Review Board. This chart highlights, since we know that one focus of discussion tonight is going to be the Citizen Review Committee's responsibilities and how this proposed system would change this process. First, as I mentioned, in terms of the review board itself, the recommendation would be to have 3 community members sit on the board, including at least 1 member from the Citizen Review Committee. There would be no change to the peer member. There would still be 1 peer member, the IPR director or designee, the RU manager, and the officer's assistant chief. So there would be IPR and then 3 voting community members on each police review board. Every case that currently goes in front of the review board would still go in front of this body for an actual vote and recommendation to the chief of police. The other major change at the board level would be that the complainant would be notified of the RU manager's proposed findings, and if the complainant disagreed with those findings, the complainant could contest or controvert those findings and refer the case to the review board And the complainant would also have the opportunity to come and speak to the review board, address the review board, and present the complainant's side of the case rather than waiting until an appeal and have it go in front of the Citizen Review Committee. They'd have that opportunity at the review board. So CRC responsibilities, on the left side is the current system for the Citizen Review Committee. Have a number of responsibilities, including there's gathering community concerns, the scheduling meetings, recommend policy changes, advise on operations. That includes the CRC currently has the authority to conduct audits of closed investigations. Another function of the CRC currently under code is outreach to the public. They can also create committees or subcommittees to help with their work. And at the very bottom, item number 8, which has been highlighted in red, that's where currently the CRC hears discipline appeals of individual officer discipline cases. The CRC does not have the authority currently to review officer-involved shootings or in-custody death cases. Under the system that's being proposed, the first 7 items would be exactly the same. CRC would still retain all those responsibilities, all that authority, particularly recommending policy changes, advising on operations, conducting audits of closed investigations, all these other functions. The big change for the CRC, they would participate as a voting member or voting members on all review boards that currently go in front of the police review board, including officer discipline cases, all officer discipline cases that go to the review board, as well as officer-involved shooting cases and in-custody death cases. So that, in a very brief nutshell, is an overview of our current system and the system that's being proposed.
Okay, thank you so much. I want everybody to just focus, to look at the agenda for a moment. And the next part calls for clarifying public question and answer. And I just want us to focus on what that means so that we don't go a little bit off track. That's if you have a question that just wasn't clear to you. Hold on a second, please, Joe. If you have a question that just wasn't clear to you, then this would be a good time to get clarifying information. If it's a comment, we want to have about 70 minutes for public comment. Right now we have over 20 people signed up, so at 3 minutes a person, we need to move very quickly. So please make sure if it's a clarifying question that it's a question that will influence your comment. And then when we move to public testimony, I'm going to ask the city attorney's office maybe to, I think that maybe, I can't remember, I don't know if the plan was to have public testimony over there. Is that, I'll just move around with the microphone. That'll make it much easier as long as it works for the television. So we'll take some clarifying questions, and we'll try to do this in just a couple of minutes so we can get to public testimony.
The obvious question for me is, you know you're going to run into trouble with item number 8, so you put it in red. Why did you do that?
Question for me? Well, really just to highlight the change, to make it apparent that that is really the essence of the proposed change for the Citizen Review Committee.
Where will the hearings of this consolidated board be held?
That's one. All of these items are under consideration. The discussion has been to have these consolidated review boards held somewhere other than the police bureau. Currently, the police review board hearings are held at the police facility, but the thought would be to hold it somewhere else besides the police facility.
Could you please clarify how the community members who are voting would be selected and how other members of this consolidated board would be selected?
Great question, thank you. I think that's exactly the kind of question we'd like feedback on. So we haven't mapped out the plan yet for how that will happen. What I can tell you is the current process of choosing CRC members and PRB members, I think we're not trying to reinvent the wheel there, but I think the intent is that we'd like feedback on that.
Could you guys go over about how these meetings won't be held in public?
Well, that's another item for discussion, and currently, the police review boards are not held in public, and part of that is because of the officers have rights to privacy or as part of their due process. There'd be a number of legal issues that we would have to take a much closer look at if there was consideration to be given to having these boards held in public, but there are a number of legal issues we'd have to take a look at.
Yes, I'm curious about how many citizens, individual citizens, are involved in this process?
In terms of the Citizen Review Committee, currently, there are 11 members of the Citizen Review Committee, and there's, a quorum of that committee, and I'm not, our IPR director is here, and he's more of an expert on the.
And actually, our CRC chair is directly behind you, so.
So the exact makeup and the quorum of the CRC, they could address that a little bit better. In terms. There's 11 members of the CRC, and there's a pool of community members who participate in the police review board process, and I don't know the exact number of the citizen members on the police review board.
Does that answer your question? Did that answer? Okay.
And one other item of discussion that we've had is potentially looking at increasing that pool of citizen members, so it's not, these are all volunteers that participate in the CRC and the police review board process, and we don't want it to be overly burdensome for any individual person.
Yes, I was wondering how you envisioned has it been considered about how the Consolidated Review Board would publish their findings? Would there be written findings? And what would the role of the advisors to this be? Would they be allowed to participate in the actual findings or have that recorded in some way? And I guess part of that would be, will there be minority reports from this board?
And I think as Ellen mentioned before, there's been no discussion about changing any of the other aspects of this Consolidated Review Board from the current board. And currently, the advisory members that sit on the board do not vote. They only offer comments during the board within their areas of expertise. There's been no discussion about changing that. In terms of reports, currently the Police Review Board publishes a public report every 6 months. The idea would be that would continue, or maybe even more frequent reports. And I believe in the current review board reports, the review board doesn't actually come up with a consensus recommendation. Each individual voting member of the board votes the way they believe the case should be handled, and that is when the cases are reported, it shows that. It could be two members voted one way, one voted another way, one voted another way, and one voted another way, and there's no proposal or at this time to change that composition.
And then, Mr. O'Connor, to answer your other question about it, for those that are not aware, the current CRC process, it's been many years that we have known, even prior to the Department of Justice investigation, that for complainants, the system was not working in maybe the best way for them. And there were a number of different feedback that we got about how it wasn't working for complainants. And so we've tried to improve that over the years. And so one of the things that we did that I think that you were nodding towards is that we added advocates, or help me, TJ, what is the actual, we call them guide? Appeal processor advisors, thank you. And I think maybe that was a little bit of your question. Are we going to retain that function with the Consolidated Review Board? The short answer is yes. The longer answer is we haven't asked some of our advisors whether or not they're willing, capable, have the ability to participate in the new system, but that would be the intent, is to preserve that functionality. And then the second answer to your question is that the auditor in a memo has made very clear that there are certain priorities that she has for the board, and one of them is to address the issue of how, if this proceeding, because of legal and and also for the privacy of the complainant and other witnesses who are involved in this, if that is to be in a non-public proceeding, how can we get transparency and reporting out in a more expeditious fashion? And so that's been one of the recommendations of the auditor, is that we have more frequent reporting out of what the review board has considered and the conclusions that they came to.
I have 3 questions. Do I understand correctly then that your proposed changes will not change the fact that the Internal Affairs Division will continue to investigate officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths?
That is correct.
And if I understand correctly, your proposal quite possibly will mean that the CRC will not conduct public hearings of any appeals.
That's correct also. The CRC would have other public functions, but not of appeals of individual officer discipline cases.
The complainant, to answer your question, Tom, the complainant would no longer be appealing to the CRC. What the complainant would be doing is making a presentation directly to the fact-finding board that has the ability to give recommendations to the chief. And currently, the complainant is only able to appeal, and this is why it's so difficult to explain to complainants. They don't have the ability to speak directly to fact finders. They have the ability to speak to a very knowledgeable citizen panel, but that citizen panel only has a limited ability to, or scope of review. And so what we're trying to do is give the complainant an earlier, more meaningful opportunity to be able to talk to a decision maker while balancing the legal and process concerns about wanting the full investigation to be able to be heard by the board.
Lastly, why was the Community Oversight Advisory Board not included in the private discussions by the focus group or work group that led to these proposals?
That's a good question, and I guess one of the things I'd want to clarify is that you're saying your proposal. I want to make clear that when I'm going to believe that you are referring to your and the collective we sense, which is all of the participants at the city, all the feedback that we've gotten. This is not a proposal of any single individual. This is a work that has been come together over the last year. These are ideas that we're putting out. And so I understand your question to be, why was the COAB not included in at least the work that the focus group did? And I think the short answer to that is that this was the opportunity that we wanted to bring the community, including the COAB, into the process, and we weren't sure. Similarly, we didn't include anyone from the Department of Justice or the PPA in the focus group, that Portland Police Association, that's the union. We wanted the current participants in the system to give us feedback before we rolled it out to the people who would be judging our compliance with the agreement, which would include the COAB. So we may have made a mistake by not including you, but it was a thoughtful mistake intended to allow you all to give your feedback about the decisions that the city had made, since you are part of the compliance oversight.
This is the first chance I've had to look at your proposals. And I guess the thing that concerns me the most is that everything on paper is just gorgeous. I mean, I love the colors. I love the numbering. I like the part in red.
Thank you.
But that piece of paper is not what's going to interact in this situation. You're going to have human beings, none of who are probably coming from growing up in the same paradigm. I'm 65 years old. I grew up behind the color line. You see these 3 cops over here? I'm scared to death of these people. They were the boundary keepers where I came from. Do they even understand that when they approach us? I'm middle class. Back in 1965, only 7% of the black population was middle class. That's up to 33%. I have found consistently in the 30-something years I have lived in Portland, as one friend of mine put it, They look at you and they see Aunt Jemima, then you open your mouth and you start talking and you're an enigma. I don't see where any of these things deals with that. You are talking about human beings applying this. The cops feel threatened. The community feels threatened. Somehow you're going to have to find a middle ground where they can actually understand and respect each other. And I don't care what kind of structure you put in, the people that are participating in it are the ones you're going to have to deal with. How do you deal with a police officer who's never met anybody like me? How do you deal with the police officer who believes in the KKK? Do you remember one of the police that head of the police department here in Portland over the years was a KKK member? I know I can't go to Klamath Falls. I've been by there on the train. You can feel the racism when you come into Portland. Every time I go down to San Francisco, I hate coming back because it means I have to go back to that same. That's going to be part of your Citizens Review Board. That's going to be part of your response from the police department. And I'm not necessarily saying that everybody's an evil person, but most of us are not in touch with our inner bigot. And if you don't think I'm as bigoted as they are, or you are, trust me, I grew up in America. America's apartheid. We learn it with our baby's milk, how to treat each other. And your board does not address that. And I suspect a lot of the difficulty the citizens are having is the fact that they say X, you hear Y, and you respond with Z. I don't see where all of this piece of paper and your color blocks are going to change that. How are you going to address that?
So first I just want to say thank you. I think your description of your individual experience, your description of what I would term structural racism, I understand that it requires, and what we're really asking in some ways is a leap of faith, and for you to trust that the system that we're putting together is designed to address issues like structural racism. And so I appreciate you sharing that perspective. And what I can tell you is that those were definitely issues that over the last year, all of the members tried to address that and to come from the perspective of how can we create a space in our accountability system for individuals to be able to, after an interaction, and I know what you're talking about is how can we affect the interaction itself, and there are other parts of the reforms that are designed to address that, but to specifically talk about, how does our system address it after the fact? What we are trying to create is an ability for people who have interactions with police officers to feel that there is a safe and welcoming space, even in an accountability system, for those to express those concerns to other citizens that are going to be sitting on a board, to the officer's boss, and directly to the officer if that's appropriate. We want to give complainants that ability and understand that we're asking you to take a leap of faith with us, that the system we're creating is designed to address some of those concerns. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Under the proposed system, how will the Citizen Review Committee that continues recommend policy changes if they don't have access to the investigations?
They will have access to the investigations. Yes, is one of the, item number 5 on this, even currently, the Citizen Review Committee has the authority under code to conduct audits of closed investigations. Of course, they're subject to confidentiality requirements, but they would have the opportunity to review a closed investigation, look at it and say whether they felt the investigation was done appropriately, were there things missed, were there other things that should have been done during the course of the investigation, were the discipline recommendations, were they in line with what the allegations of misconduct were. So they currently have that ability, and they would retain that ability under the new system.
My concern is that you are suggesting switching from a system right now where the citizens of this city can give input, can let the police officers and the people who govern them know what their feelings are about the way that an officer exercises his or her discretion in a particular instance, and you are now taking this into a private system where the citizens don't know what's going on. And you've mentioned that this apparently is because of some privacy rights. Where do those privacy rights come from? State statute, city ordinance, the union contract? Why is this so mandated that it be a closed system?
Sure, and that's, I mean, some of the areas are, there's, for example, there's a state statute that limits the ability of a public body to disclose information about an investigation of a public safety officer. There are the union contracts, and there's basic due process rights of an officer who's been accused of something, some alleged misconduct that could result in that officer losing pay, being demoted, losing their job. They have certain due process rights to a fair and unbiased proceeding, and those again, that's a general answer, but those things all come into play, and those are some of the aspects of the legal issues that I was referring to when I mentioned there are legal issues involved with having these officer discipline cases heard in a public setting.
Just to kind of piggyback on that question, I know there was an issue of confidentiality versus the public interest in terms of how much information is being shared. And I was just wondering, particularly with issues of officer-involved shootings and custody deaths, how are we going to decide what's in the public interest and what is going to be shared with the public and be open to that discussion?
Sure, and that's something we'd have to take a very close look at, depending on the system that's ultimately proposed, whether the public interest can be balanced on a more general basis and say every single case is going to be open to public inspection because of the public interest. Generally speaking, you have to look at the facts of the particular case and make a determination of whether there's a sufficient public interest there to overcome these protections that are built into the law to protect the safety or I'll call it the privacy of the employees. And ultimately, it's the district attorney that makes a decision if they make in the public records context, makes a request for those records, the city claims the exemption from disclosure. Ultimately, it's the district attorney that makes that decision. But in the cases that have been decided by the district attorney, those are the kind of factors that are balanced when they look at these cases, and it's usually done on a very individualized basis.
I guess maybe the question would be, could that be expanded to something more general, which would then perhaps open up? Because I think the big concerns is what you mentioned, like public custody deaths and officer shootings, that maybe we wouldn't have access to that information.
Sure. Yeah, we understand that. We'd have to take a much closer look at that to see if that's possible, and if so, exactly how that would look.
What happened? What were the incidents that happened that has caused for this new review and this revision of the old system? Was there, I remember reading in the Willamette Week that there was an incident where somebody got violent or mildly violent or something like that. Was that a big part for this renewal of the system? And if so, you said something about wanting to make sure that the citizens felt safe. But I would ask if that was a huge role in the changes that you're proposing. It seems like the safety in mind is more on this end.
I think maybe you're referring to an incident that happened at the CRC where one of the CRC commissioners was a person in the audience who disagreed with the commissioner's reasoning threw a glass of water in his face. So that incident was very concerning for everyone involved, but it was not at all the driving force or really had I mean, it was discussed, but this process has been going on for a year.
What were some of the other driving forces?
The biggest one was that the procedural justice aspect for complainants was clearly not working, that complainants did not feel that there was procedural justice in the process, and that bled over into the community's general sense also that the process wasn't working, because if the people who are participating in it as complainants were expressing dissatisfaction, we felt that that probably was having a big influence on the community's general perception that the officer accountability system wasn't operating fair and expeditiously. So that had been a concern for a number of years, and then the Department of Justice, in its review of our compliance with our settlement agreement, made clear that we were not in compliance in a number of areas, not the least of which is that we were unable to complete our investigation and propose discipline within 180 days. And so our current appeal process, the average length of time that it's taking is around 140, I think maybe it's 146 days. So it was clear that we were not going to be able to, we could not, over our year's work, come up with enough changes to the CRC system that would trim that 146 days down to something that would fit within the procedural justice of a fair and expeditious process occurring within 180 days.
I actually had a different question, but I have to comment on what was just said. Having gone through this process multiple times with many different complainants, including police officers who've used the system, the frustration is the reasonable person standard and the inability to bring in their stories. That is the frustration. I have not heard anything else other than the frustration with the reasonable person standard. The timeline issue is a little ridiculous to me. If you are an attorney, have you not been in our court system? We would be lucky if we could get court cases out as quickly as the CRC gets theirs done. That's just ridiculous. But my question is, to follow up actually on Maxine Bernstein's questions, can conduct audits of closed investigations is where we're assuming we're going to come up on our policy changes. And yet, the majority of policy changes that come recommended are a direct result of the hearings process, the appeal process, and frequently from the public comments made at those hearings. I am looking at city commissioners, and I have to point out that the only one I've seen there is Amanda Fritz, Commissioner Fritz, which I appreciate her showing up, and witness this. It's through the course of the hearing that people hear things, the general public hear things that says, wait a minute, that's not right. And officers trying to de-escalate a situation by insulting somebody, that's not right. Reading it in a investigation file does not give you a finger on the pulse of the public and their reaction to what policies need changing. The public component of this CRC process, the openness of this process, as messy as it is, actually it's no more messier than anything else in our democratic system, produces valuable information. And it's not going to be seen on the pages of closed investigations. And I'm not sure how you're going to address those policy changes. Is that fair?
Pointing to a chair. Question on in the new system, the person that we refer to as a complainant filing an appeal in CRC. If I understand correctly, in that, I'd like you to say I'm right or wrong here, they get to make their case before the decision is done, and that's their opportunity. They're really the fact of a citizen feeling that the decision that was made was wrong, they no longer have an option of a place to appeal. They can comment during the process of finding, but they can't appeal if they don't agree with the finding? Because it seems you've taken that part of it away.
No, I appreciate that question. The short answer, since you asked me to write, is that right or wrong? The answer is it's wrong. The boss, the RU manager, since you seem familiar with the system, the RU manager is going to issue a finding. That finding will go to the complainant. And if the complainant disagrees with that finding, then the complainant appeals to the Consolidated Review Board. And that's the point at which we're addressing the concern that Ms. Browning just raised, that we've also heard from complainants, which is, I want a fair and safe opportunity to tell my story. And so the complainant who disagrees with the RU manager's findings will be at a Consolidated Review Board. It will be a non-public, we think at this point, board, and the complainant will speak to the board. The board will be made up of citizens, more citizens than police officers, and they will be able to tell their story. And then that board will make a recommendation as to whether or not the finding should be sustained or not.
But also police. The board is also police.
Yes, there will be police membership on the board.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate these great questions, and I appreciate the great answers. And I just want to point out that we do have a little bit over a month to kind of get through this information. So for tonight, I want to make sure we're moving forward so we have enough time for everybody to speak that signed up. And before we do that, we're going to take a few moments to hear from the chair and the vice chair of the Citizen Review Committee. And then at that point, we'll move into public comment. So I'd like to introduce the committee chair, Kristen Malone, and the vice chair, Julie Ramos.
Hi, I'm Kristen Malone. This is Julie Ramos. I'm going to do my best here to express the serious concerns that the committee has expressed regarding the current proposal and to give you all some insight into our perspective on the process. I'll say by way of disclaimer that it's difficult to represent the diverse views of the 9 current CRC members, especially given the short time we've had to try to understand, evaluate, and discuss the proposed changes. I will do my best not to generalize, overstate, or substitute my own views for the CRC. However, based on a meeting we had last week to discuss our thoughts, I can make one thing very clear. The CRC opposes, in the strongest terms, any change to the process that decreases transparency and public access to the complaint and appeal process. I want to stress that the timing of these changes affords a very limited opportunity for meaningful input from the CRC. Although Jim Young, one of the longest-serving members of the CRC, was part of the focus group that generated this proposal, his service on that body was conditioned on secrecy. He couldn't tell us what was being discussed, and we could provide him no input. So while Mr. Young certainly provided a perspective from the CRC, he couldn't truly represent the committee in those conversations. Instead, we first heard what had come from these proposals on July 6th, only hours before our regularly scheduled meeting, and the CRC was only able to meet to discuss their perspective last week. A recording of that meeting was created by IPR, and we encourage council to listen to it. What we realized at that meeting is we were dealing with a proposal that is poorly understood, even by its drafters, and that is therefore hardly clear to us. What we did hear was the consolidated model is likely to require that appeals be conducted in non-public meetings. Assuming the new model permits a complainant to testify in those proceedings, complainants will be forced to testify in a room full of uniformed officers. And it will require CRC members to conduct their deliberations in the same context and without community support. Many members of the CRC felt that this could have a chilling effect on community complaints, as well as CRC criticism of bureau practices. The CRC was encouraged that the consolidated model would finally permit the committee to apply an appropriate fact-finding standard, the preponderance of the evidence standard, and to hear appeals related to all manner of allegations, including those stemming from officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths. These are important changes to the citizen review process that the CRC has been pursuing for some time. However, the CRC felt that these gains would not make up for the severe losses to the community inherent in the current proposal. Council and the City Attorney's Office must closely scrutinize the claim that Oregon law prevents these consolidated proceedings from being held in public. Representatives from the City Attorney's Office appeared hard-pressed to articulate what differed between CRC and PRB meetings that required the latter to be private as a matter of law. Beyond the use of code names, Officer A, Officer B, which are used by the CRC in our hearings, we cannot think of much. And it appeared no analysis of the relevant statute's public interest exception had occurred in this context. Perhaps more fundamentally, council must carefully consider whether this proposal addresses the problem at hand. These changes are said to originate from the court-ordered requirement that appeals be completed in 21 days, and the CRC recognizes, as did the DOJ settlement, that there are aspects of the city's accountability system that are Byzantine and that the process can be slower than many would like, and yes, slower than the consent judgment requires. But the minutes of the focus group meetings that we were able to review and the discussion we had last week suggested that little actual analysis was performed to identify the real bottlenecks in our process or the causes for delay. Based on my own experience, as well as analysis performed by Portland Cop Watch, several factors may be in play. First, the committee has used its new power under city code to order additional investigation in several cases. This investigation is not under our control, nor is it clear whether this power would remain, as it should, in the consolidated model. Second, we've had several post-appeal meetings as a result of challenges to findings that were not accepted by the chief. Again, it's unclear whether these procedures would continue to exist in the consolidated model. Third, as the city auditor pointed out last week, the CRC is operating under a backlog of complaints that will follow us into any new procedure we adopt, whether the consolidated model or anything else. A suggestion was made that more meetings could occur per month under the consolidated model because the CRC would not be required to attend each meeting. However, the pool proposal offered by the focus group would have the same benefit without all the secrecy. Without claiming to speak for the CRC for a moment, I personally feel that a pool or panel proposal should be further considered by City Council. It's probably unreasonable to ask this group of 11 unpaid citizen volunteers to meet weekly to process appeals. But if we were, for example, to meet together for a full committee meeting once monthly and to pledge one additional weekday per month to sit on a panel of 3 or 5 to be reserved far in advance, we could be hearing 3 appeals per month. Doing so would require us to address the increasing appeal volume in a systematic rather than an ad hoc manner. But if we could plan our calendars and our expectations for more frequent hearings, we could make real progress. As we understand it, we are now only about a month away from Council's vote on this proposal. The handling of the focus group's recommendation goes against everything the CRC heard about the purpose and intent of the group. From the first whispers we heard about a private focus group meetings until the council-approved direction we heard about just a few weeks ago, we were assured that the focus group was little more than a brainstorming session, an opportunity for frank discussion of the strengths and weaknesses of our system, a chance to bat around possible improvements without criticism or judgment. The CRC is now concerned that in a rush to make a change, Council will do more damage than good to the appeals process and to community trust. CRC members in attendance last week were universally distressed that the city, with little discussion or fanfare, would undercut one of the primary strengths of the city's police oversight system, and that's the ability of the public to access and understand what the city does to respond to complaints of police misconduct. That's what I have.
Ditto, everything she said, plus. I have a couple of concerns. One of the major ones is just the whole focus group and how that happened and how we received the information from it. And I also take offense at the generalization that complainants and appellants are not happy with the process. That has not been my experience in the 1.5 years I've been sitting on the committee and listening. And the 143 days that keeps getting thrown around, I don't know where that comes from, and I'm certain that it's not all CRC. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both for that. We really appreciate it. And as we move forward, we have 50 minutes, and so I want to get to the public comment. All of the rest of the meeting will be for public comment, and I'm just going to suggest we kind of frame our minds in a step forward, step back kind of mentality. So if you've taken up some time and let the council know where your opinion is, it would be great if you wanted to pass and then come in at the end to make sure someone else had time. And we're going to allow for 3 minutes, which we do have a gracious timekeeper who has volunteered to keep time. If you can say it in 2, that would be great and would allow people to make sure that we get through this long list. Like I said, we have 21 people signed up. I will come out in the crowd with a microphone to save time, if that's okay with everybody. And first on the list is James Young, who I will mention. Oh, got this mic on? Who I will mention has a surrogate speaking for him.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Constantine Severe. I am Mr. Young's surrogate. Mr. Young is a current member of the Citizen Review Committee, an experienced attorney who has business matters that he has to attend to. Mr. Young was a member of the focus group, and he had some thoughts that he wanted to make sure that council receives. So Mr. Young's preference would be that any board that would serve a review/appeal function should be a meeting that is open to the public and have the ability to hear concerns from a community member. For appeals to be meaningful, both community members and police officers should feel comfortable attending, which unfortunately is not the current set of circumstances. If council ultimately decides to move towards a consolidated review board, it is important that the new board be composed of a majority of civilians, and that the Citizen Review Committee would be required to have a standing committee that would monitor the activities of this consolidated review board and have a report out function on a regular basis so that the public could be informed of the progress or lack thereof of this new consolidated review board.
Sheila Wilcox.
Hey, it's me again. I've lived here 34 years. In that time, I've seen, don't take this personally, guys, it was given to me to understand that there was a way to behave to stay out of trouble, and that sooner or later they would get you, because it was kind of like a catch and release program. So there were certain blocks that you were told, don't go there, the cops will stop you. Don't drive this car, the cops will stop you. Don't go out after dark, the cops will stop you. Now, you've set up an adversarial situation between the citizenry and the police department. They have a union, we don't. I can see where they're concerned. They would like their rights protected. I would like their rights protected. I want us to come to an understanding. We're all human beings alive on this planet at this moment in time. We're all not experiencing it the same way. And I can't relate to where they're coming from, and they can't relate to where I'm coming from. And believe me, they're going to bring that into this process. And I don't blame the citizens, folks over here, for being disturbed that basically you've set them up in an adversarial situation with people who have authority against people who don't. If I'm trying to tell you that what you're saying to me is not culturally acceptable, how do I get that across to you? I'm an entertainer. I've gone all around this planet. I know when I go to Italy, I go to Greece, I get a big giant hug. I get people who argue. I get love everywhere. I know if I go to Norway, they don't talk. They're not allowed to. They are amazed by anybody who speaks above a whisper. So they perceive everything differently, those two groups. And I suspect with the police officers coming from communities that are predominantly white, that they don't know what it's like for the rest of us. And they don't necessarily understand that when a person from another community starts talking back at them, it's not disrespectful. That's their normative. And I'm suspicious that through all of these interactions, you're going to have predominantly a white viewpoint. There's going to be no other here. It will be, this is what I think, this is the way it's supposed to be, and you're wrong. How do you deal with that? I don't see anything in here that addresses that. They're already upset. What are you, the CRC? You can already feel that you're being set up in this adversarial situation and you have no power. And even if you decide and try to explain, ultimately, if I follow your little chart, the commander that has to talk to the police officer in question, he gets to make the final decision, correct? Am I correct?
Chief does.
Okay. So you got a bigot for a chief. Now what? And he doesn't even know he's a bigot. It's an inner bigot. I mean, unlike most of us, Trump seems to be in touch with his inner bigot. We, however, are not. And I mean, that's everybody. That's women, that's men, that's black, that's white, that's transgender, that's gay, that's straight. We all come within a paradigm. And we assume that the way we view the world is the way everybody else should. I've been outside of here. No, that's not how it goes. Everybody comes up with something that approximates and works for them. But I don't go around labeling it good and bad. I had to learn not to do that when I meet other people from other cultures. I'm not sure the police officers are aware of the communities that they're in and the normative in those communities. So I can see, just from the get-go, you're going to have all kinds of conflicts, and they're going to be literally unresolvable because Party A says X and X should be true, and Party B says Y and Y should be true. There's nothing in any of these proposals that gets any kind of closeness, because we are we, whether we like it or not. We are all alive right now at this moment, and we are all we got to interact with. I want to see them do their job because, yes, there are dangerous people in the world. Sure.
Okay, thank you. Roman Garcia? Oh, okay. And thank you again. I don't mean to cut you off. The next comments are from Dan Handelman. He sent them to be read, which I will do. I'll put my glasses on. To Auditor Joel Caballero, Mayor Hales, and members of City Council, most core members of Portland Cop Watch are at a pre-scheduled event and unable to be here at tonight's hastily assembled town hall. The highest priority of the DOJ settlement agreement is to build community trust. The manner and substance of the proposed changes to the oversight system do not lead to that trust. All past major changes, from its inception as PIIAC in 1982 to the move to IPR in 2001 and the stakeholders group in 2010, involve lengthy community input. Our July 22nd analysis of the auditor's proposed changes found the proposal doesn't solve the problem of misconduct complaints taking too long to be resolved. 2, getting rid of public appeal hearings on misconduct cases thwarts the will of the people. And 3, the CRC's appeals are where the community gets a true sense of police training, policy, and accountability. In addition, the city attorney says moving complaints hearings into a room that excludes the public and press will improve procedural justice. There is no procedural justice in a star chamber. We analyzed the 7 appeals CRC heard since council changed the ordinance to speed up hearings, proving that pushing CRC appeals behind closed doors will not save time. 2 cases went through reviews and appeals on the same nights. 2 cases were delayed after the Bureau refused to accept CRC's recommendations. In 1, the chief agreed to sustain a complaint. The other led to further investigation. 2 cases were sent back for more investigation. Though the agreement requires such investigations to be completed in 10 days, the first took 6 months, the second took 3 months, and the rejected findings case took 5 months. 1 case could not proceed because IPR failed to invite the officer's commander to the hearing. In addition, the Bureau refused to attend 1 CRC hearing, a case still in limbo because the Bureau used the wrong directive to analyze the officer's behavior. Another case was further delayed when IPR changed the summary report on the day of the hearing without informing the appellant. There were some scheduling conflicts when appellants were unable to attend meetings, but those delays won't be resolved by moving the hearings behind closed doors. The new proposal circulated on July 28th indicates that conflicting parties, IPR, IA, the officer, and complainant, can all send cases to the PRB. In the case of the officer who interfered with the videographer, the IPR director urged the PRB to sustain the findings and was outvoted 4-1. Only allowing CRC and City Council appeals will grant procedural justice for a person wronged by police. Perhaps controverted cases could be sent directly to a CRC-PRB hybrid for public hearings. We urge council to use the COAB Accountability Subcommittee's proposed changes as a basis for discussion. We do support some aspects of the auditor's proposal, but not at the expense of public hearings. Those are changing the standard of review to preponderance of the evidence, letting CRC hear appeals of deadly force cases, putting more civilians on the police review board, and allowing complainants to attend PRB meetings. Thank you, Dan Handelman and other members of Portland Cop Watch.
You were probably already going to do this, but can I request that you get copies of that as well as Mr. Young's written testimony? We've got written testimony from Mr. Steenson, but if we can make sure that the council has copies of all that
I have those for you
at
right
some point, that would be good. Thank you.
Next is Joe Walsh.
I think you're going to hear this a lot tonight. The basis is trust. You're hearing it from everybody. And the problem that you have is we don't trust you. We don't trust the police department, and we don't trust you. You have to earn our trust first. You can't keep doing these things at the last moment, and everybody scatters and tries to figure out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. The fact that you did not incorporate the COAB is stunning. My God, the COAB is the very organization that's supposed to go to the citizens of Portland and get their input, and you left them out. They are the most important part of the settlement. The guys from Chicago are not that important. The COAB is. And as much as we argue with them, they are the core that you can get your trust back. But you have to earn it first. Don't say to us, well, trust us, when we find out that you've been meeting for a year and a half or a year, and nobody knew what was going on, and the very people that could do something were not even included. So where's the trust? Where are you earning our trust? You're not. And I'm telling you right now, if you think we're a pain in the ass, where do you see what comes after us? And I'm telling you, be careful, folks. Learn our trust. We want you to be our representatives. You don't know how many times these organizations that are here go to your city council and beg you not to do something, and you do it anyway. That's not trust. That's screw you. I know more than you do. I am a mayor. I am a council person. I know more than you do. No, you don't. There are 600,000 people in this city. We know more than you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Julie, you guys are off. Okay, Chris O'Connor.
Thank you. I work as a public defender in the court system here in Multnomah County Circuit Court. It's kind of the citizen accountability system, or the civilian oversight system, to use the terminology here tonight. When your officers decide to arrest someone and incarcerate them for a minor crime or a serious crime, me or one of my colleagues may get appointed to represent them in the court system. We read thousands of police reports, and unlike some of the people in this room, we actually get to subpoena them and question them, and they have to actually answer us, which I think would be convenient for some of the folks involved in this system here that you're describing. If I were actually to punch a police officer today, an arrest would come within minutes. Paperwork, charges would be filed within a day, hours probably. A court process would start definitely within a day or two, 72 hours most likely. And there'd be a jury trial in 60 days. So with all respect to other folks that have spoken earlier, the court system's actually a lot faster than this. You're going to have a trial. If it was a 100-day trial, the presiding judge would be breathing down the lawyer's neck, screaming at him, wondering why there hasn't been a trial yet. I want to say, from the perspective of a defense attorney, a criminal defense attorney, the reforms don't get to the real issue here. Lots of talk about procedural justice, but the real goal should be real justice. They don't address the outcome. None of this fixes the outcome. People want an actual transparent outcome informed by the public members' decisions about whether or not an officer's decisions were correct. This proposal actually moves you farther from that because it takes away the public and the transparency part. If you want to speed it up, you can use what probably the most cynical among us think of the actual whole system. You could just skip straight to the part where the mayor, the chief, or the union arbitrator just exonerates the officer at the end of the process. If you want to speed it up, it would only take a couple hours. We just don't have the trust in the system. We never have. The only reason me or one of my colleagues would actually suggest to one of our clients who had a complaint about a police officer to go through the complaint process or go down to IPR and fill out the form is if their civil attorney said, yeah, it's good for a lawsuit later. Otherwise, we wouldn't bother because we would guess that typically the outcome would have minimum or no consequences. Even if there were consequences, there'd be an expectation that the leadership or the union contract, sort of the agency capture of the district attorney's office by the union and the police bureau members would result in no real consequences. We'd only consider, again, filing that if there was some useful outcome. And none of these reforms seem to get to the real issue here, which is that it's not about procedural justice, it's about real justice.
Okay, thank you. The next comment was submitted in writing by Ann Brayfield. I am Ann Brayfield, concerned citizen. The public trust depends on open meetings and the conduct of the public business. City employees and their interactions with the public must be subject to public scrutiny through a process open to the public. Our democracy depends on this openness. The city's concerned that it may not be found in compliance with the settlement agreement, specifically as it relates to the need to streamline the police accountability process so that cases are decided within 180 days, does not seem likely to be solved by combining the Police Review Board and the Citizen Review Committee for the purpose of hearing citizen complaints. And furthermore, such a change, especially as regards misconduct cases being heard without the public present, fails the public, including police officers, who need to know that police officers are being held accountable and how that will happen. The speed with which proposed changes are moving forward and the fact that much of the proposed changes work has taken place out of the public view and without direct COAB participation increases public distrust of much needed police reform. Please consider the importance of public trust in all you do as you move forward in this process. Thank you. Next is Barry Joe Stoll.
Thank you. May 17th, 1980, Sheila, up there in the back row, you've heard from, and myself, among many others, performed in front of 25,000 people in Waterfront Park. July of that year, she took my blood as a phlebotomist. I had back surgery. I now have a disability. It's called central pain syndrome. I have a philosophy of nonviolence, and my understanding of a lot of things is informed by that gentleman up there, Dr. Sunleitner, PhD. He's on the board of Portland Community College, our host. I used a telephone I went up to Lewis and Clark to call that gentleman we've heard from, Chris O'Connor, when I founded Free Camp David W. Crowther in 2010, and I was mugged by Lewis and Clark College Campus Safety. My neck hurts today. I heard on the radio that the federal government gave the Portland Parks Bureau $500,000 to finish a park in the Kelly neighborhood, and that same week, Portland City Council gave Lewis and Clark College that $500,000 as a rebate in development fees. I was arrested at City Council the day before Thanksgiving, and that day, thanks to the mandate from the Department of Justice, Officer Todd Engstrom prepared the mandated use of force report, said that there were no injuries. However, on the 10th of December, grand jury issued a felony indictment for my intentionally injuring that same officer. Sergeant Price prepared his after-incident report, and I got that in March. Likewise, no injuries, but I was held until February 9th, 2016 on a felony charge that everyone knew couldn't possibly be a felony. And I learned when I went to get my property upon my release that it was destroyed. Now, in 2006, my nonprofit affordable housing landlord, PCRI, destroyed $20,000 worth of my property, and that property, 4066 Northeast Grand, is vacant today, and it's on our affordable housing inventory, and you're funding them, City Council. You're partnering with PCRI. Your sidewalk management ordinance was voted in with his illegal vote Dan Saltzman telephoned in his vote without a quorum. And those signs are up all over downtown, and those are used to harass people. And I have stuff where I have to go to court, my 2012 arrest, City Central Precinct, found not guilty in May. Then I was arrested July 14th, 17th, 17th, 19th, got out on bail, and I was arrested on my way into City Council when I was on the agenda then, August 29th. And those are on appeal still. And today I went to court to see if I could get a ruling on my 1993 return of things seized, where there wasn't a forfeiture ordinance. My goods have yet to be returned by the City of Portland Police Department. So if you think there's any reason why I should treat you anything but the frauds that each of you know you are in your hearts, you want to have some trust? I shook hands with Chief of Police Marshman today. He invited me to come here tonight. If I knew you were here tonight, I probably wouldn't come, because maybe I'm going to get arrested for having contact with my victims. You're my victims? No, I'm the victims of your continued inadequacy. I graduated from this institution with highest honors. My GPA was 3.84. I'm the smartest guy you're going to ever mistake is not smart. You think I'm insane? You think I have a mental illness? No, I do not. The vacant affordable housing is vacant right now, and it's named after Gretchen Kafori, who, like yourself, Mayor, when you were commissioner, signed the partnership agreement with street musicians, which we can go to Amanda Fritz's website and link to the 1994 document and get the 2006 document that doesn't have the free music zone that we were promised and never got as part of that agreement, that you promised in 1994 that you would enforce, that you would back your signature, and you don't because you're a fraud. Now you know. I have a severe disability. It's a neurological condition, and I know how to control it. And your police officers don't. I talked today to find out who the gal was that willingly volunteered to testify on my behalf about the physical abuse that I endured from Officer Engstrom at the time of the arrest. Of course, he reported to the Department of Justice there were no injuries. Went to the grand jury, said he was injured, and lied about how I was injured. You want to have some trust? Treat me with some respect. Thank you, Brad.
Okay, thank you. Tom Steenson is next.
Are you going to keep texting while the meeting's going on?
Yes.
I'm a member of the COAB, the Community Oversight Advisory Board. I'm also a member of the Accountability Subcommittee associated with the COAB. My testimony is my own and not that of the COAB or the Accountability Subcommittee. Attached to my written testimony that I've given to Council is a memorandum dated July 9, 2016, and an accompanying table. The memorandum contains 46 recommendations to the DOJ, City of Portland, Mayor Hales, Chief Marshman, and the Portland Police Bureau for substantially improving citizen-based oversight of the PPB, which were developed by a work group for the Accountability Subcommittee. 44 of the 46 recommendations were approved by the subcommittee at its July 12th meeting and have been submitted to the COAB for its consideration. The recommendations seek to streamline the complaint system for investigations and review of allegations of police officer misconduct by moving all community complaints to the purview of the Independent Police Review Division and Citizen Review Committee, eliminating unnecessary and duplicative parts of the current process, and adding the new position of police auditor to oversee the proper functioning of the system. The recommendations would also further the transparency of the accountability systems related to the operation of the PPB by keeping all meetings of the Portland's police oversight bodies open to the public, including appeals to the Citizen Review Committee. Here's some background. The COAB was created pursuant to the requirements of the settlement agreement where the DOJ sued the city for a pattern of excessive force against those in mental health crisis or those with mental illness. The agreement requires the city to improve its accountability systems, including providing better oversight systems to prevent patterns of practice of unconscionable conduct and or erode community trust. I believe implementation of the recommendations from the Accountability Subcommittee will do just that. The COAB was created to leverage the ideas of talent, experience, and expertise of the community, I quote. Among its responsibilities is to independently assess the implementation of the agreement and make recommendations to the parties. If someone could give me some more time, I'd appreciate it. I believe the recommendations, if implemented, will accomplish those purposes. As Joe and others have pointed out, the focus group created by the city has been meeting for months behind closed doors. The COAB was not included. Only recently, and really tonight, have we seen any details as to what they're suggesting happen. Contrary to that, the Accountability Subcommittee met for months in public, reviewed various materials from the City of Denver, the City of San Francisco, had the IPR director, the CRC come and testify for us, Portland Cop Watch, and others, all in a public manner to gather information about how to make accountability better in Portland. We joined in the conclusions reached by national experts, as well as those in this community, on these recommendations. In particular, they will eliminate the Internal Affairs Division, eliminate the commander's review of the investigation, send all community cases to a panel of the CRC for recommended findings, allowing for commander's input rather than using the Police Review Board. It will also eliminate the PBB's ability to request a conference hearing with CRC. All this will save time. Importantly, the COAB currently has 8 members out of 15. The city has been remiss and has failed, and I think is in violation of the agreement by not appointing people to fill the 7 vacancies. At 8 people, we barely have a quorum. We need 8 to pass recommendations. I'm still hopeful that the full COAB will be able to consider these important accountability subcommittee recommendations. I expect them to approve most of them, and I would expect them to then be submitted to the DOJ in the city. I believe the city has been in violation by not including the COAB in its focus group and its efforts to bring us here tonight. I believe it has continued to be in violation by not fully staffing the COAB. And I think if it continues on this road with a hearing on September 7th and likely council approval of changes without full consideration of the COAB recommendations, it will also be in violation of the agreement. Please, please remember that the COAB was set up to be an important voice of the community in the implementation of the settlement agreement, and we need to be heard.
Thank you, Tom. Next up is Kristen Chambers. And I just want to note that we have about 20 minutes and we still have about 14 people signed up, so if you can be quick, that would be great. Next is Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Chambers, and I'm speaking on behalf of the National Lawyers Guild. I have some written testimony, so I'll provide that to you, and I'll just highlight a few points. First of all, as others have mentioned, the timing of this meeting and the information that we've been provided has been completely inadequate. We have scrambled to come together to just try to understand what the proposal is, let alone provide suggestions and ideas. First time I had any idea what the proposal about was last Thursday night when I attended the CRC meeting, and then first time I saw this in writing was tonight. And I just ask that before the September 7th hearing, we get more notice of what the proposal is going to be, and that is made publicly available so that people can adequately respond to it. What's unfortunate about the way this has been proposed and the ideas that have come forward is that it really seems like we are just making a couple of improvements to the Police Review Board and eliminating all of the critical aspects of the Citizen Review Committee. And what we would like to see, if we are actually moving towards independent oversight of the police, is to give more empowerment and more effectiveness to the CRC. And there are a lot of creative ways that we can do that, including looking at the actual issues that are being faced and coming up with solutions that don't compromise the independent oversight that we are seeking. With respect to the public access, I think the fundamental problem with having closed meetings is that it doesn't matter how well-intentioned the group is. When you go behind closed doors, it's easy for people to get pressured into things, especially when there are people of authority in the room, such as many police officers. I think the research here needs some more work. We have heard that there are possibly some legal issues and some ways to resolve this in a way that would be legal, and that hasn't been looked into. And so we'd like to see that be done. Also, I haven't seen any reports on the concerns from the complainants that we've heard about this process. The National Lawyers Guild has provided advocates in the past to people going through the CRC process, and we have never received any of those complaints. Lastly, with respect to additional research, I just did some research last night online and came up with 4 other cities that have all community member review boards that conduct public hearings. So this is being done. It can be done. I think I put this in my letter to you, and I hope that can be looked into. In addition, San Diego has a review board with 23 members, and they do the rotating panels, which has also been discussed. So we'd like to see some more looking into these alternative options with a real focus on transparency and making this a community oversight board, because that is the only way that we are moving towards independence.
Thank you. The next comments were submitted by Annette Jolin, Portland City Town Hall, regarding the Town Hall on police accountability changes. I'm writing to urge you to preserve the public's access to Citizen Review Committee hearings. Open hearings have been part of the citizen review process since its inception nearly 35 years ago. During that time, there have been 15 different police chiefs. In the early 80s, the citizens of Portland voted to create a committee of citizen representatives to oversee the police handling of complaints brought against Bureau personnel. Central to the oversight mission was an appeal forum where citizens could seek redress for police decisions about their complaints. The ability to have grievances aired in a public setting was essential not only for the individuals involved, but also for achieving the larger goal of repairing the trust that had been lost in community police relations. Commissioner Lindberg appointed me to the newly created Police Internal Investigations Auditing Committee, or PIIAC, when it was first established. I was one of 2 committee members with prior police experience and served as the first chairperson from 1982 to 1985. Portland was among the nation's first cities to have a civilian oversight committee. Prospects for success were dismal. Most predicted that we would either self-destruct or be co-opted by the police. The fact that in nearly 35 years neither predictions came true is, in my opinion, large part due to the confidence the public had in our open hearings. It is true that open meetings are often less expedient than meetings in private, but they are the only real protection for maintaining a measure of trust in an inherently divisive relationship, such as that between the community and the police. It is in this light of these considerations that I urge Mayor Hells and Commissioner Fish, Fritz, Novick, and Saltzman to vote against any citizen review committee reform that seeks to abolish public hearings. Thank you for your consideration, Annette Jolin. And next up is Debbie Ione. Sorry.
Yes. Thank you. Hi, I'm Debbie Iona, representing the League of Women Voters of Portland. The League's longstanding interest in police oversight dates back to 1981, when one of our past presidents served on the Stores Committee that recommended creation of Portland's first oversight system. The fast-track nature of the process used to develop this proposal is disturbing, particularly in light of the serious issues facing Portland and our nation around policing. Had the focus group met in public, as many of us requested, we would have had the opportunity to understand the alternatives under discussion, raise questions, and offer more appropriate solutions. Instead, the community is being presented with a proposal absent any analysis of the actual reasons for the time it takes to complete an appeal. Furthermore, there is no evidence that this new approach will result in a 21-day process. In other words, the solution does not address the problem, and it sacrifices many of the things most important to the public. We do not understand why the city would be found out of compliance on the 21-day goal when the settlement agreement gives the CRC the authority to request more investigation, adding time, but ensuring procedural justice. Before moving forward, the city needs to examine recent cases and determine the cause of the delays. Once that information is available, the CRC and other interested parties should meet in public to discuss solutions that maintain our all-civilian review body and public appeal hearings. If council adopts the consolidated model, it will be a huge step backwards for the community. The review board will no longer be made up entirely of civilians, and hearings will take place behind closed doors, something that has not occurred in Portland since the early 1980s. CRC appeal hearings are the one place where the public can, through actual cases, learn about Bureau policies, the investigative process, and accountability. The League recognizes your obligation to comply with the settlement agreement and encourages you to take care of other items needing attention, such as filling the 4 vacant City Council appointed seats on the COAB and scheduling the required meetings with the Chief Mayor and COAB. The decision-making process on the review committee should be deliberate, thoughtful, and inclusive. And then finally, I reached out to Frances Storrs, who was the chair of the 1981 Storrs Committee a few days ago. She just responded as I walked out the door and said she thinks it is important to continue with an all-civilian review board that hears appeals in public. Thanks.
Carol Cushman, League of Women Voters. Whoops. Portland's oversight system should be consistent with the values and concerns of its residents. I would like to share from some significant reports related to the development and evaluation of Portland's current oversight system. First, from the Citizens Task Force on Internal Affairs from the Storrs Committee in 1981. Quote, most of the witnesses who came before the task force characterized the citizen complaint process as being closed and secretive, a system where the police investigate their own misconduct with no external checks and balances. Of concern to many citizens is the lack of any public involvement in the IAD process. As one witness stated, secrecy creates suspicion. From addressing citizen complaints about police, a proposal for change, March 2001, from the Office of the City Auditor. Quote, the basic goals of the police oversight system are to improve police accountability to the public and to provide the opportunity for a fair and open resolution of complaints against the police. Specifically, the proposed system retains active citizen input and offers redress through public hearings. From the 2008 performance review of IPR by Luna Firebaugh, for the lucky ones, and Portland is one, the system becomes integrated into the fabric of the city and the city administration. Even when departments are doing a top-notch job disciplining errant officers, the public may lack confidence in the process. An oversight procedure that provides citizens with a window into how the department operates can change the opinion of these concerned citizens. Communities must take responsibility for fashioning a system that fits their local situation and unique needs. Ultimately, Peter Finn, the author of National Institute of Justice, said, a commitment to the value of citizen oversight of police and transparency, the right of the public to know the public's business, is also essential if a civilian oversight agency is to be effective. And those were brief excerpts from what we turned in. The quotes were a little bit longer.
Thank you so much. Next is Rochelle Silver.
Hi, my name is Rochelle Silver. I'm a current member of the COAB, and for 5 years, from 2009 to 2014, I was a member of the CRC, and so I'm quite familiar with the accountability system in the city. What I would like to say first is that the accountability system is not broken and should not be thrown away as it exists now. There are certainly enhancements that need to be made to the existing system that would make it better. They are 3 things that I'll just mention. The standard of review needs to be changed from reasonable person to preponderance of evidence. IPR needs to be able to compel testimony from the Portland Police. And the third thing is that there needs to be a procedure for officer-involved shootings to be appealed to the CRC. But more importantly tonight, I'd like to talk about a word which you've heard a lot tonight, and that's the word trust. As I read the proposed accountability system and listen to the presentation tonight, I don't see how this is going to help with the primary issue that is not only in this city, but throughout our nation, where the community does not trust, they do not trust the police, and the police do not trust the community. It seems to me that moving to the proposed system only makes that worse. Not only will it not be a citizen-involved, total citizen-involved review, it will be heavily weighted with police presence, and as somebody mentioned, the authority of the police, people wearing uniforms, people wearing badges, people with guns and other paraphernalia, have an influence on citizens, whether they're aware of it or not. The other major issue is the transparency, which you've heard about from many people, and I just like to repeat it. You cannot not open the door to the public and let them see what you're doing. It won't work. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. I just want to point out that we're coming up to a little under 10 minutes left, and I'm just checking to see if folks are willing to stay for 15 more minutes. Okay, because we started public comment a little late to no fault of the public, so.
And just so everybody knows, I'm doing 2 minutes, and then the people will go off to give you 1 minute anyway.
So the, so the first buzzer means you have 1 minute left, unless you've requested not to have it, and the next is 3. So the next is submitted by written testimony by David Denke, I might be saying that wrong. I cannot attend this meeting tomorrow, but I would like to weigh in on a proposal for change in appeals of alleged police misconduct. I'm a former member of the PPB Police Review Board, the Citizen Review Committee, and am presently serving on the PPB Training Advisory Committee. My point of view is this: CRC, or by PRB, if CRC and PRB are somehow combined, hearings of citizen and police appeals from PPB discipline decisions must be held in public. I've read that one change being considered is to close appeal hearings on the public. Such a change should be considered unacceptable to the City Council. I say this because I believe there is an overriding public need to have access to these hearings, to see and hear the appeal process, the evidence, and the considerations that go into the final decision. The CRC has been hearing such appeals for years in public without the need to disclose the names of the officers involved. I am sure that ways can be devised to continue to maintain officer confidentiality. Keeping such appeals open to the media is essential to having informed citizens and voters. Public appeals hearings have led to important changes in police procedures and training, changes that may not have occurred if the hearings were closed to the public. The PPB has worked very hard for many years to maintain public trust. To close these hearings to the public would be a giant step backward in maintaining that trust. Thank you for your consideration. And next is Dr. T. Allen Bethel. I'm sorry, yield to
Dr. Haynes, okay.
Thank you.
To our Honorable Mayor Charles Charlie Hales and distinguished members of the Portland City Council, I am Dr. Leroy Haynes, chairperson of the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform. The AMA Coalition for Justice and Police Reform has been engaged for 12 years in the battle for justice and reform of the Portland Police Bureau. We are a vital part of the settlement agreement that the City of Portland is under with the federal court. In fact, we helped to write the present agreement through our status of enhanced amicus with the federal court. We come today to give input to the proposed changes in the settlement agreement that would change a major part of the agreement. namely the proposal to consolidate the Citizen Review Committee with the Portland Police Review Board. AMAC has always believed that one of the major answers to police accountability and building trust is to have an independent citizen review board with the power to compel testimony. In fact, CRC in its present form was an agreement that was in term compromise to exist today in its present form. AMAC always believed that if we're going to move forward as to true police accountability, we must have an independent citizen review board with the power to compel testimony. Now, we continue to work with other intermediate accountability systems until there is a political will within our city government to reach that point. Now, there are strengths and weaknesses in the proposals of the consolidation with the Police Review Board. And yes, it may make things more efficient and stable than what you may see sometime, but democracy is messy. However, the weaknesses are troubling to us. First, it is dominated by police reviewing themselves, and that is unacceptable to the public, especially stakeholders who are part of the reform movement and the call for justice. Any true oversight board must be a majority citizen and must be citizen-driven. Secondly, it meets in secret. The citizens are left out of the hearing and giving input, and the citizen appeal process has not been clearly defined. Furthermore, there's no provisions to have an advocate for the compliant in the process. Thirdly, the city has not given the citizens of the community enough time to put public input. The AMA Coalition understands that the city is trying to respond to the goal and the timeline of the settlement agreement. But we must ask the question, how is this different from what we've had over the last 12 years? And we must ask the question, does it move us forward with reform and justice for all the citizens of Portland? Thank you very much, and I have extra reports for the council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Next up is David Davis.
So my name's David Davis with Multnomah County Cop Watch, and City Attorney Ellen Osenich, she said to take a leap of faith and trust us, but doing backwater deals with rooms full of cops and victims of police brutality is not a good model to gain trust. And you know, the psychological impact of being in a closed meeting with a room full of cops away from the community support and the media will not help anyone but the police, the city, and anyone else trying to cover things up. This is a slap in the face to the community. Media coverage, community support, and public comments are very important to the process. This is an insult that we're even discussing that CRC meetings be held in private settings in a closed meeting away from the scrutiny of the public and the media. This is a clear example of the evolving lie of what passes for transparency and police accountability in our city and our country and our world these days. You know, when the police union and the mayor and the city council, the city attorneys, you know, everyone is just failing to achieve any trust, and you guys are just taking steps back. Is this like actually you guys think it's a good idea? And Mr. Mayor, you know, / police commissioner, you kind of helped cover up the O'Day shooting. So is you being able to vote on this as you're our outgoing corrupt mayor / police commissioner who's warred on journalists, cop watchers, police accountability activists, you obviously will be voting to put this in the back room. I know what your vote is going to be because I know your mindset. I know you're all about covering up. You're not about transparency. I was arrested with Barry Joe Stull for filming his arrest, and you guys still have not provided the surveillance video of my arrest. You know, so where'd the surveillance video go? It's obviously there. I received a partially clipped and edited version, so that shows that you, and I'm sure all you guys have seen the exact same edited version that was filmed off a cell phone camera off the surveillance thing, edited at a specific part that, you know, so you guys are already involved in covering up, and you think that this is a good thing. If any of you guys vote for this, then it's obvious that you guys don't serve any goodwill to the community, and you're just there to cover up, you know? This is a step backwards, not a step forward, and it's a violation of the DOJ settlement. And, you know, COAB wasn't even included in this, and you guys have been talking about this for the last year and a half, and then I just found out about it like about 8 hours ago because you guys didn't even notify the public. There wasn't advance notice. This was all put together sloppily. You think Dan Handelman wouldn't have been here for something so important? Did you know he had a meeting somewhere else and then you just scheduled this to go with your ongoing cover-up? I mean, really?
Thanks, David. Next up is Clay Lubin.
Brad says that I can speak today from my sadness. And he says I can speak today in behalf of our ancestors. I have ancestors in several museums. Boston. There's a statue of one of my ancestors in the Capitol in the United States. King Kamehameha, as a matter of fact. I have ancestors enshrined in Cody, Wyoming as Hawaiian cowboys. But I myself am in the process of becoming an ancestor. I have grandchildren who are listening and thinking and inheriting a very broken world because I couldn't fix it for them. Since 2010, I've been researching what's been happening here. And I want you to know that in the year 2010, 6 human beings were shot, 5 died, and all of those persons were in a crisis at the time of the shooting. Of those 6 persons shot, 2 were young black men. Of those 2 black men, 100% were shot with their hands raised in the air in the surrender pose that is known all around the world as an international sign of don't shoot me, take me as a prisoner. I shared my research with the city. I shared my research with the DOJ. The DOJ investigated and they came to the conclusion that my analysis was correct and the facts were there for them to find. I also found that there had been a misuse of TASER, which is a human rights violation. So what I'm trying to say to the city here is you've made no provision to protect either the constitutional rights of citizens or the human rights of citizens. And this plan that you're foisting off on us here today similarly makes no such provision. until you address yourself to the real issues. Do we have constitutional rights in the city of Portland? That's the real question. We know that the police are protected by their Fifth Amendment rights. We need our Fourth Amendment rights, among other things. We need the right to freely assemble peaceably and to petition our government for a redress of our grievance. We expect you to serve as a government, not just as a corporate entity worried about employees or contracts or budgets. People matter. I don't like to criticize people, especially not in public, especially when I'm upset. I don't like to criticize. But I have to ask the city attorneys, and there are lots of them, why would I trust you? I trusted you with the settlement agreement. The thing I need to tell all of you is that everybody that worked on the COAB has had their reputation trashed, destroyed. They've been distressed. I don't understand why that happened. This was supposedly under the watchful eye of Judge Simon, whose authority, I don't know where it is. I think you all are in contempt of court, but I'm not, in charge of this situation here. I think that every person that has spoken here has spoken from a humane and a human point of view. And it doesn't matter how many charts and graphs we drag out and display around. The plain fact of the matter is, Portland is in the eye of the whole world. Are you aware? Do you know that The Atlantic has just published our racist history? There comes a time, I believe, when we set our bureaucracy aside and we turn to our conscience. I know every single human being has a conscience. I know that. And every conscience has light in it. And I need that conscience to give light to me. That's what I would like to see, is the sharing of the light by all of us, so that I don't have to be so sad.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from artist Laura Vanderlyn.
It's really, 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 really difficult to address you because I feel like I'm just wasting my breath. I really do. I have absolutely no trust and no faith in any of you. And any of the people that you appoint, any of the people that you select, any of the people that you employ. You protect people that shoot people in the back. You defend and are offended. That Chief O'Day shot somebody in the back and he smelled like alcohol, and you said that he's being smeared. Who is smearing him? The county? The sheriff from Harney County? Is he the one that's smearing him? A police officer smearing another police officer? I'm confused. That's another little secret. This is another little secret you want to keep behind the back. Then you hire Chief Marshman. A week after he ensured my arrest at a public community engagement meeting. That's the only time I ever saw him engaging with the community. Even up out of his chair and walking to ensure my arrest and other people's arrest for asserting their First Amendment rights. Along with me. Then you have this attorney over here, Alan Osenich, who said at the meeting that the public can speak robustly. What is the definition of robustly, Alan Osenich, a city attorney? You're sitting up here talking. It's so difficult to sit in the same room with someone like you and somebody like you. And you're sitting there when somebody's talking about their pain, you're sitting there on your cell phone texting proudly. You don't care. You don't care. You hire Chief Marshman, Captain Marshman, Mike Marshman, who is a domestic abuser. He stopped women. He stopped his girlfriend. How many girlfriends did he stop while he was in uniform and had a car? The only reason that they knew about it because one of them complained. If there's one, there's more. And I think this happens a lot in your police department. It's frightening. It's creepy. He picks up his own child and chokes him against the wall and leaves bruises on his neck. You hired him. And then you hired the other guy too.
Thank you. I just want to point out we have 4 people left, so we're getting close to the end. And I appreciate people sticking around because everybody's words are very important. Next we have Luke. I can't see the last name very well. Gutspell, maybe? Okay, thank you.
There's a metaphoric aspect to what's happening right now, and I think that the person who spoke and said that the country is watching is right. I think Portland has, I'm new here, I've only been here for 3 years, but I do feel strongly that it's a moment right now when Portland can maybe take a move and a turn for the right direction, buttressed by the energy that our entire country is feeling right now and the urgency that we're feeling to bring everyone to an equal level. So I hope that we can do that. I know that no one is entirely, I don't think that you all are entirely bad, and I don't think that police are entirely bad. But I think it's important to bring these issues down to the human condition, like so many people have been talking about, and try and weed through the minutia and just listen to your conscience and listen to your heart.
Thank you. Next up is TJ Browning.
Thank you. I'm going to stand because I need to make some eye contact with some people. Dan Salzman, I am sorry. I'm sorry. Mayor Hales, I'm sorry. Officers, I'm sorry. Maxine, I'm sorry. Reverend, I'm sorry. How many times do we have to go through this? I've been at this since 1992, and I'm hearing the same thing. I'm hearing the same thing. The citizens have asked repeatedly for true accountability on the police. We've had commissions. We've had committees. I chaired one for Fear Cats where we had, 20 people, the left and the right, literally? We had Will Aitchison from the police union sitting on one side of the table and the ACLU sitting on the other. Boy, those were some interesting meetings. We come up with proposals. They're ignored. And yet I go through the auditor's report and she says, oh, wow, I went through some of that stuff they came up with. And by gosh, we've actually done some of that stuff. Imagine that. Imagine that, like we actually know the will of the people, what we want. But here's what we're not paying attention to. I spend way too much time researching this stuff as if the statistics are going to give me some sort of key to saying it right so that we all can figure out how to do this right and we don't keep going around this same damn band. Jury's out. Come on, folks, let's be honest here. There is no empirical research that says civilian review boards change police behavior. There's none. But what it does show is time and time again, it creates trust.
Officers, you can't do your job if we don't trust you. We're not safe as citizens if we don't trust them or each other. The only thing we know for sure that a Citizens Review Board does is produce trust. And trust is a commodity right now in our society at this particular moment we cannot squander. Secrecy, rushing. That is not how you get trust. That's what we're all talking about. That's what we're all complaining about. That's what we're all crying about. We're all victims here, and we all need to be listened to. This is my last thing, and this is my empirical research. Please listen carefully. This is a 2013 study, the latest one I could find. Citizen Oversight Committees in Law Enforcement. The paragraph is, the title is, Why Have a Citizens Oversight Committee? Because it improves transparency and community relations. Why? Benefits to law enforcement. Benefits to law enforcement. Empowering citizens, improving community police relations, promoting change within law enforcement, and increasing police transparency. Please tell me, wise people, please tell me, leaders, how does something behind closed doors, done in secret, and rushed to a vote does any of that? We cannot afford to squander trust right now, not in Portland, not anywhere. Please slow this down and take a really good look at this. None of us are going to come out ahead with this particular proposal. There aren't any winners in this.
Thank you, TJ. Next is Matt Klung.
Hi. Although he stepped out early, Commissioner Saltzman was the one who requested Senator Wyden take a review of this, and Senator Wyden, thank you also, as Commissioner Saltzman, for requesting these reviews. And thank you to Senator Wyden for asking the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice to take a look at this in the first place. I am a little saddened by the participation here. Where is our Harvard-trained civil rights lawyer, Nick Fish? Where is Billy J. Williams? Where is Adrian L. Brown? Where are the rest of the representatives from the Department of Justice here in the state of Oregon? Where are the judges' representatives? The particular case I'm involved in, first I learned of it was when Internal Affairs contacted me. I was contacted by, what was his name? Robert McGill. And he asked me why they tased me. And I had no idea what he was talking about, why he was trying to get a hold of me. And apparently that took him a long time, although my address and my phone number was on the complaint I filed in District Court of Oregon. I don't know why it took him like 45 days to get a hold of me. If there's a problem in Internal Affairs, that's your problem. It's been back for 4 different reviews. I've been to the Citizen Review Committee 3 times. I am scheduled to go for a 4th time on September 7th. After you vote in the morning, I go that night. So is this going to be moot? Is there going to be no hearing that night with the CRC? Are you going to do away with it? What is going on? So Internal Affairs was the reason why when I go on the 7th of September, it will be 499 days. You're looking at 180 days, it's 499 on September 7th. That's where we are. So if you really want to get to the meat of the problem, move past Internal Affairs. Don't allow them to investigate these things. Hire your own people. Get rid of these fools, because when I went to the last hearing, the city attorney's office suggested to Ms. Ramos, the assistant chair, that they not accept my paperwork. It's in city charter that you can present. Anyone in the audience, anyone can mail it in, they can email it in. I had it, I brought it a day beforehand, had it date stamped, and then the day I went to the hearing, Ms. Ramos, the chair that night, said, we cannot accept this. The city attorney told us not to accept it. It was the right taser policy that Mike Reese had a signature on it with a date. It showed when it was good, beginning to end. It's like, I can't believe these things, they would refuse to look at it. It was ridiculous. I used to do administrative law hearings for a living. This is not rocket science. I'm not a lawyer. I am a former paralegal. People have brains. These people don't have brains. Some of the people on the board that you pointed, the CRC. Unfortunately, I have no problem with their length of time on reviewing these things, but the internal affairs I do have a problem with.
Thank you, Matt. Our last person is Andrea Gutierrez. Hi, sorry. And I'm sorry, that's Gutierrez.
As a Hispanic woman, I have no protection from discrimination, racial discrimination, no protection from physical racist attacks in Portland, no protection by the police that, other people do, white people do. I'm living in a city with virtually no civil rights for Hispanic people. There are a lot of bright, talented Hispanic people that have the ability to contribute to the city, but without basic civil rights, there's no way for Hispanic people to do so. Everywhere you go in the city, you see businesses and places that are 99% white. The excuse the media and people often say is that Hispanic people choose not to go to these highly segregated places and businesses. But the truth is, we can't. Often Hispanic people are threatened, intimidated, and harassed or physically attacked when they go to these segregated places or businesses. And people say, well, you should call the police. I have called the police. Within the last 4 years, I've called the police between 5 and 10 times for harassment or attacks that were racially motivated. The police have never arrested anyone who has harassed me or attacked me, and they have often the police have made derogatory comments about my race. The city council, I doubt the city council will listen to any of the public's comments today, especially any from a Hispanic woman. I believe that this town hall meeting is just a publicity stunt. The city council themselves either enact or they enact policy measures that encourage discrimination towards Hispanics. Nick Fish refused to investigate 2 reports that overwhelmingly prove that landlords and apartment managers are actively discriminating against Hispanic renters. Portland is a city based on and around racism, and the city council is encouraging it in a variety of ways. I urge the city council to spend less time vacationing and instead spend more time attending COAB meetings to have a better understanding of the relationship between minorities and the police.
Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to thank everybody for the amazing words and the excellent listening. I really appreciate everybody making space for folks. Good job. And with that, we'll say good night and get home safely.